Billionaire Alexander Whitmore was known for humiliating anyone who dared challenge him. That night, in a ballroom filled with millionaires and influential politicians, he pointed to a golden harp and taunted, "Play it, and I'll give you $300 million. Laughter echoed among the elite, certain that no one would dare. But what no one imagined was that the maid's son, a boy invisible to everyone, would step forward and, within seconds, make the most powerful man in town gasp in front of everyone. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel now to help us spread more moving stories like this one, which transform and inspire lives. The main ballroom of Whitmore Palace glittered that evening with crystal chandeliers, marble tables, and arrangements of rare Italian flowers. It was the 55th birthday of Alexander Whitmore, a billionaire known for his arrogance and the cruel way he ridiculed anyone he considered beneath him. Guests from around the world gathered, businessmen, diplomats, and celebrities, all curious to see what eccentricities the tycoon would display this time. But in the center of the ballroom stood something that drew more attention than all the luxury: an antique golden harp, illuminated by spotlights that made it seem almost sacred. Alexander, in a tailored black velvet suit, gold tie, and cold gaze, walked up to the instrument. His voice echoed through the microphone, thick with irony. "This harp belonged to kings and nobles. They say only worthy hands can extract a true melody from it. Play it, and I'll give you $300 million. Laughter erupted among the guests. For everyone there, it was just another provocation from the billionaire, a spectacle of power and humiliation to entertain his privileged audience. No executive, artist, or diplomat dared even approach the instrument. In the corner of the room, however, two figures stood out from the glitter and ostentation. Elena Morales, 38, in an impeccable blue uniform and white service gloves, stood discreetly serving glasses of champagne. Beside her, her son Gabriel, a 14-year-old boy in a simple t-shirt, worn pants, and ripped sneakers, watched silently. The boy's deep brown eyes were fixed not on the guests, but on the golden harp, as if a secret call echoed in his mind. Little did Alexander know that his provocation would find an unexpected response. And it was at that moment that the fate of the evening began to change. Laughter echoed through the hall like a cruel wave, spreading among the guests like sparks through dry straw. Businessmen in ties cackled loudly. Ladies in luxurious dresses fanned themselves with jeweled golden fans, while murmuring mocking phrases between sips of champagne. To that audience, Alexander Whitmore's challenge was nothing more than a spectacle designed to reinforce his power and feed his ego. After all, who would dare attempt to play a legendary instrument under so many judgmental gazes? The harp, gleaming under the golden spotlights, seemed even more untouchable, as if it held a secret that none of those present would dare reveal. Deep down, everyone knew it wasn't just about music, but about courage, and no one there was willing to risk their prestige for ridicule. One of the executives, laughing with a glass of wine in hand, commented loudly enough for all to hear, "$300 million for whoever plays? Well, that's just the price of a whim for Mr. Whitmore." The comment drew even louder laughter, as if it had given voice to the collective thought. Others, in a more malicious tone, added, "No one here would dare to humble themselves before him. This challenge is impossible." There was, however, a layer of fear behind those words. Those present knew that challenging the billionaire meant risking not only failure, but also public embarrassment. The challenge wasn't musical, it was psychological, a cruel test in which the mere act of approaching the harp would be seen as weakness. Therefore, every laugh hid the truth, cowardice disguised as amusement. Meanwhile, Alexander stood imposingly, a sneer etched on his angular face. Wearing an impeccably tailored black velvet suit and gold tie, he looked like a king before his subjects, certain that his authority would never be questioned. His gaze swept the room, slow and calculated, as if choosing the next victim of his irony. The guests continued to laugh, unaware that with each burst of laughter, they reinforced the invisible wall that sustained the billionaire's power. The sound of laughter mingled with the ambient music, transforming the room into a theater of vanity and submission. But the harp remained there, silent, gleaming, like an unfulfilled promise. And it was precisely that silence, hidden behind the ostentation, that was about to be shattered by someone unexpected. In the corner of the room, far from the flashes, toasts, and laughter that dominated the atmosphere, stood Elena Morales, 38, in her impeccable blue uniform and white service gloves that already betrayed the fatigue of hours on her feet. Her attentive gaze followed every detail of the party, ensuring that nothing was lacking for the discerning guests. Despite her elegant and discreet posture, her hunched shoulders carried the weight of years of invisible labor, where dedication never translated into recognition. For that elite, Elena was nothing more than part of the scenery, like the velvet curtains or the silver trays. A woman who served, smiled, and disappeared without a trace. But that night, beside her, there was a presence that stood even further out of tune with the world of ostentation, her son, Gabriel. And that simple detail would change everything. Gabriel Morales, just 14 years old, wore a simple, faded t-shirt, cheap fabric pants, and sneakers with worn soles that no longer concealed the loose threads. He was out of place, like a speck of reality amidst the artificial sea of diamonds, expensive perfumes, and rehearsed laughter. His eyes, however, were untouched by the elegant clothes, nor by the exaggerated shine of the jewels that glittered beneath the chandeliers. He was fixed on the golden harp, which seemed to pulse in the center of the room as if it had a life of its own. There was something in his deep, almost hypnotic gaze that revealed more than simple curiosity. It was an inexplicable connection. To him, the laughter, the mockery, and the scornful looks were just distant noise. The harp called to him, and only he seemed to hear that call. Elena, noticing the intensity with which her son stared at the instrument, felt a tightness in her chest. She tried to disguise her nervousness by adjusting the tray in her hands, but she couldn't hide her concern. She knew how dangerous that look could be. It would attract attention, and she feared Gabriel would become the target of even crueler ridicule than she already faced as the maid's son. But at the same time, there was something about him that sent chills down her spine. It wasn't just childish curiosity. It was pure courage, a silent determination that seemed impossible to contain. He didn't blink, didn't look away. While laughter echoed through the room and Alexander reinforced his authority before the elite, no one noticed that, there in the forgotten corner, the true protagonist of that night was already preparing to change everything. A humble boy, ignored by everyone, was about to challenge the impossible. Alexander Whitmore, standing erect in the center of the room, watched the guests like a predator choosing its prey. His smile held calculated contempt, the same expression he used in meetings to destabilize adversaries. Suddenly, his eyes lingered on the corner where Elena and Gabriel were standing. He frowned for a moment, surprised to see the boy staring so intently at the harp. Then, as if spotting an opportunity for an even greater spectacle, he decided to make him the target of his irony. He raised the crystal goblet, drew everyone's attention with a theatrical gesture, and, pointing his finger at the boy, declared mockingly, "And you, boy, do you dare to play? Play, and the 300 million are yours." A heavy silence fell over the room before renewed laughter echoed. The provocation seemed so absurd that it immediately became a source of collective ridicule. Some guests looked at Gabriel with contempt, as if his mere presence were an insult to this lavish celebration. Others, more cruel, whispered offensive comments. The maid's son? He can barely hold a plate, let alone play a harp. Elena felt her face flush, her heart racing, and she lowered her head, trying to shield her son from ridicule. But Alexander's firm, ironic voice had already planted the poison. All eyes were on the humble boy, now a target of public ridicule. Gabriel, however, remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the harp as if the cruel words hadn't reached him. The collective laughter seemed distant, muffled by the imaginary sound echoing in his mind. There was a strange, almost defiant calm about him that intrigued a few attentive observers. Alexander, realizing the boy wasn't intimidated, smiled even wider, pleased to have found someone who would play his game to the end. The magnate had believed this provocation would end in tears, in the boy's embarrassment, and in the reinforcement of his own authority. But, without realizing it, he had just opened the door to the most unexpected scene of his life. A spark had been lit, and the fire was about to spread throughout the entire hall. The hall erupted in laughter at Alexander's provocation, as if it were the funniest joke of the night. Businessmen slapped each other on the back, ladies covered their mouths with fans as they laughed, and young heirs openly mocked the boy. "Look, the maid's son is going to make 300 million, one of them shouted, drawing even more laughter that echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers. Each laugh was like a spear thrust into Elena's heart, who, motionless, struggled to maintain her composure before the elite who saw her only as an insignificant shadow. The atmosphere, once celebratory, transformed into a cruel spectacle of public humiliation. The sound of laughter seemed to fill every corner of the hall, drowning out even the background music, as if the entire world were conspiring to crush the dignity of that invisible family. Some of the more discreet guests feigned indifference, but even they cast contemptuous glances at Gabriel. It was as if the mere idea of a poor boy approaching such a valuable object was sacrilege, an insult to the social order everyone there believed they upheld. Elena felt her face heat, wishing she could hide her son from so many hostile gazes. "Please, Gabriel, don't look at the harp," she thought, holding the tray with trembling hands and a racing heart. She knew the cruelty of that elite and knew that, for them, turning a humble boy into a joke was just another evening's entertainment. But Gabriel didn't look away, as if all the noise were merely a backdrop to something much greater that only he could sense. It was as if he were on another frequency, listening to something no one else could hear. Alexander, watching the audience's reaction, reveled in the scene. His smile was cold, satisfied, like that of a hunter trapping his prey. He believed he had found the perfect diversion, using the humble boy as an object of mockery to reinforce his authority. Each burst of laughter echoed as proof that the magnate still controlled the entire room, manipulating emotions like chess pieces. But what he didn't realize was that the collective laughter was beginning to have an unexpected effect on Gabriel. Instead of retreating, the boy felt something growing within him that even he couldn't explain. A silent, almost defiant courage, bringing him closer, step by step, to the impossible. His fingers, unconsciously, moved as if they were already touching the invisible strings of the harp, announcing that the night was about to take an unpredictable turn. The room was still vibrating with laughter when suddenly Gabriel stepped forward. The sound of his worn sneakers scraping against the marble floor echoed louder than any laughter. Conversations ceased for a moment, as if no one could believe what they were seeing. The boy, slight, in a simple t-shirt and a fixed gaze, walked slowly toward the center of the room. The contrast between him and his surroundings was stark, a humble boy facing the heart of a world that didn't belong to him. Elena let out a desperate sigh, her legs trembling as she tried to reach him without attracting attention. But Gabriel continued, his steps firm, guided by something invisible that made him defy all logic. With each step, the silence seemed to expand, as if the room itself were testing the strength of his courage. A buzz filled the room. Some guests widened their eyes, others burst out laughing again, convinced they were about to witness the ultimate embarrassment. "He'll be forever ashamed," whispered a lady in a red dress, barely containing her laughter. A young heir, champagne flute in hand, mocked loudly. "Look at that! The maid's son thinks he's a musician now." But despite the taunts, there was also an eerie silence growing in the air. Some sensed something unusual in that determined look. It wasn't arrogance, nor was it recklessness. It was genuine courage, pure and unarmed, which contrasted with the cold vanity of everyone present. Even the musicians hired for the party stopped playing, curious, as if sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. Alexander, sitting in his leather chair before the harp, leaned forward in surprise. The mockery still etched into his smile, but inside he felt a pang of curiosity he couldn't hide. He had expected tears, hesitation, or flight, but never that silent determination. For him, it was just a performance about to end in failure. But for Gabriel, each step toward the harp was a pact with himself, a definitive choice to face the impossible. When he finally stopped before the golden instrument, the entire hall fell silent. The laughter faded, replaced by a tense anticipation that hung in the air. The boy looked up, took a deep breath, and stretched out his hands, ready to play. The golden strings gleamed in the light, reflecting not only the opulence of the room, but the courage of those who dared to challenge it. The entire hall held its breath as Gabriel raised his hands toward the harp. His fingers trembled slightly, but his eyes remained steady, filled with a determination that belied his young age. The golden light from the spotlights reflected off the metal strings, transforming the instrument into something almost divine. The silence that fell was so profound that even the clinking of cutlery on the table stopped. The guests, previously laughing, now watched with a mixture of disbelief and contempt, expecting imminent failure. Elena, motionless in the corner of the hall, clutched the tray to her chest, as if it were a shield against the inevitable. It was the moment that separated ultimate humiliation from an unexpected revelation. Even the musicians hired for the party backed away, as if recognizing that something greater was about to happen. With a hesitant movement, Gabriel struck the first string. The sound echoed pure, crystalline, as if it had traversed centuries of silence just for that moment. The chord filled the hall with a vibration so intense it silenced even the malicious whispers. The notes didn't sound like those of a beginner, but like the awakening of something ancient, held deep within the boy's heart. Many frowned in confusion, trying to understand how someone so unlikely could produce such a perfect sound. Elena brought her hand to her mouth, feeling tears sting her eyes. This wasn't luck, nor was it chance. There was soul in the sound, there was truth. The echoes seemed to grip each person by the throat, forcing them to listen, forcing them to feel. It was as if the harp recognized the boy and had chosen to reveal itself through him. Alexander, who had maintained a mocking smile until then, felt his body involuntarily lean forward. The simple chord had touched something in him he couldn't explain. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating, but the harp's vibration was real, filling every corner of the room. The guests, who had previously been laughing, now stood motionless, like statues before an inexplicable phenomenon. Some exchanged surprised glances, others felt a lump in their throats for no apparent reason. Gabriel, for his part, seemed completely oblivious to where he was. His fingers rested on the strings, as if conversing with an invisible presence. It was only the beginning, but it was already clear that night would not end as Alexander had imagined. The mocking challenge was beginning to transform into something sacred, and no one could laugh anymore. Gabriel took a deep breath and let his fingers glide across the harp strings again. The sound wasn't just music. It was as if each note had a life of its own, filling the air with an energy impossible to ignore. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper, and then gained strength, transforming into sound waves that seemed to touch not only ears, but hearts. The hall, once a stage for laughter and mockery, now became a silent temple where everyone was forced to listen. The gold of the harp reflected in the boy's pupils, and his posture was no longer one of shyness, but of someone guided by a certainty greater than himself. It was as if an invisible force guided him, transforming every gesture into art. With each new chord, the space filled with a vibration that captivated everyone's attention, as if time had slowed down. Gradually, the guests' expressions began to change. Some, unable to resist, felt tears trickle down. Others stared fixedly, transfixed, unable to explain the feeling that overcame them. The music spoke not of wealth, power, or status, but of humanity, of hidden pain, of dormant hopes. It was as if Gabriel had opened a secret door that only the harp could reveal. Even waiters and security guards, accustomed to going unnoticed, stopped to watch, overcome with the same reverence. That hall, which minutes before had brimmed with arrogance and vanity, was now submissive to the sound coming from the hands of a humble boy. The very walls seemed to vibrate with the melody, as if even the physical space recognized the grandeur of the moment. Alexander Whitmore, sitting at the front of the stage, felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: vulnerability. His heavy chest seemed to beat out of time with each echoing note. He, who had built his life on numbers, contracts, and power, now found himself dismantled by a 14-year-old boy. He tried to keep his face firm, but his eyes betrayed the internal battle. How could something so simple break his iron armor? Around him, the silence was absolute. No one dared interrupt that melody that already seemed eternal. Gabriel, absorbed, played as if born for this moment, and with each chord made it clear that he wasn't just fulfilling a challenge. He was transforming humiliation into triumph, in front of everyone. Even Alexander, against his will, felt his throat tighten, unable to control the impact those notes caused. The harp's notes echoed like invisible waves, piercing every corner of the hall. They didn't just fill the air, but penetrated deep into emotions, breaking down defenses that money and status had erected for years. Guests who had once mocked now had tears in their eyes, some trying to hide it by discreetly wiping their tears with silk handkerchiefs. It was as if each chord revealed hidden weaknesses, stored memories, and pain never confessed. A diplomat known for his coldness remembered his impoverished childhood. A socialite, notorious for her arrogance, thought of the daughter she had lost years before. Gabriel's music neither judged nor chose. It reached everyone, without distinction, revealing truths none of them would dare admit in public. The transformation was almost palpable. The cruel laughter had turned into reverent silence, and arrogance was replaced by vulnerability. Even the youngest, accustomed to living on appearances and displays of wealth, seemed stripped of their masks. Their hardened expressions softened, their once haughty gazes now becoming humble. Some tried to resist, crossing their arms or forcing neutral expressions, but the music pierced them like blades of light, impossible to block. It was a silent but powerful invasion, capable of tearing down invisible walls erected around every heart. Even the security guards, rigid and impassive, revealed a glint of emotion in their eyes. At the center of it all, Gabriel remained absorbed, unaware of the impact he was making. For him, there was no audience, no millionaires or aristocrats. There was only the music and the memory of something greater pulsing within him. His fingers glided across the strings naturally, as if they were extensions of his soul. The sound grew in intensity, and each note seemed to carry an invisible message, a promise that beauty could still blossom in the most unlikely of places. Alexander, who had always controlled everyone's emotions with money and power, now found himself unable to contain his own reaction. The tycoon, accustomed to dominating entire rooms, felt as if the music had taken his place, and it left him speechless. Alexander Whitmore, seated in his imposing leather chair, could no longer maintain the expression of indifference he had cultivated for decades. His eyes, once cold as steel, now betrayed a mixture of confusion and discomfort. Each note of the harp seemed to pierce him, awakening memories he had believed buried forever. He remembered his youth, still penniless, when music was his only companion in his darkest moments. But he had sworn to forget that weakness, replacing it with an empire built on contracts and humiliations. Now, in front of everyone, he felt the weight of that memory return like an avalanche. The tycoon, accustomed to controlling every emotion, no longer owned his own heart. The billionaire who commanded millions of dollars was now dominated by bills that came from the hands of a poor boy. The audience around him noticed the change in his expression. Some, surprised, whispered among themselves, "Is he emotional?" Seeing the most ruthless man in town falter in front of a 14-year-old boy was unthinkable. Alexander tried to hide it, adjusting his posture, but his hands trembled slightly, betraying what words couldn't hide. It was as if the music were a key that unlocked locked doors within him, revealing the human side he himself had suppressed. The billionaire who mocked the pain of others was now forced to face his own fragility, and the audience watched in silence, fascinated by this unexpected collapse. For many, this was the first time they had seen Alexander lose control. And suddenly, the untouchable man seemed human. As Gabriel continued playing, lost in the sound that filled the hall, Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: shame. Shame for having ridiculed the boy and his mother. Shame for having turned a challenge into a cruel spectacle. And shame for realizing that true power lay not in the money he displayed, but in the purity of a talent that could not be bought. His chest heaved silently, as if fighting back tears that threatened to fall. But holding back was useless. Each chord of the harp stripped him bare before everyone, revealing that, deep down, he was just another man vulnerable in the face of beauty. For the first time in years, Alexander didn't know what to say, and that silence said it all. The tycoon, accustomed to being the center of attention, was now just another spectator surrendered to the greatness of a boy no one expected. As the melody spread throughout the hall, Elena could no longer hold back her tears. With each note, her heart was transported back to the past, to memories she tried to keep hidden. Gabriel's father, Rafael Morales, had been a talented harpist, a simple man, but gifted with a rare gift. He played in small performances, in churches and local festivals, but dreamed of taking his music to the world. However, life was cruel to him. He died young, a victim of an illness that could not be treated due to lack of resources. Before leaving, he left Gabriel the greatest treasure he possessed, not a fortune in money, but a passion for music and the secret of how to communicate with the harp. Elena, silently, had always feared that this gift would be lost, but now she saw it blossom before the most powerful eyes in the city. The audience didn't yet know the story, but they could feel it in the intensity of the melody. Each note carried a truth that went beyond technique. It was the reflection of an invisible legacy that spanned generations. Gabriel wasn't just playing strings, he was reclaiming his father's voice, bringing back dreams that death had interrupted. That's why, even without formal training, each chord sounded so pure and profound. Elena, pressing her hands to her chest, whispered softly, "He's here. Raphael is here." A high society lady, upon hearing the whisper, shivered, without understanding exactly why. The entire hall sensed a spiritual connection to the scene, as if the harp were more than an instrument, a link between worlds. Gabriel, oblivious to the reactions, played with his eyes half closed, as if he were in another time, another place. His expression was serene yet intense, and his hands seemed to move with a naturalness that bordered on the supernatural. There was no score, no rehearsal. There was only an intimate connection between the boy, the harp, and a memory that transcended logic. Alexander, watching this, felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know the story, but he could have sworn that the sound carried something beyond the human. For the first time, the magnate felt small before something money couldn't buy. The audience, unnoticed, leaned forward slightly, as if absorbing every note. And at the center of it all, a simple boy was becoming the heir to an invisible greatness. Elena could no longer remain still. The body that had previously sought to hide behind the tray now trembled, and tears streamed freely down her face. It was impossible to fight the memories the music evoked. Each chord of the harp was like Raphael's voice echoing again in the present, reminding her of the days when, sitting in a cramped little room, he would teach Gabriel how to position his fingers and feel the vibration of the strings. For Elena, the music wasn't just sound, it was living memory, a reunion with the man she had loved and lost too soon. She clung to her uniform, trying to contain her emotion, but the dignity she had always used as a shield dissolved before everyone's eyes. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to cry. Some guests noticed her reaction. A lady in a blue dress, who minutes before had treated her with indifference, now looked at her with a mixture of respect and empathy. It was as if the silent suffering of that woman, so often ignored, had finally found a voice through her son's harp. The room, filled with a reverent silence, was no longer just a stage for spectacle and vanity, but witness to a human story that transcended wealth. Elena remembered the days when Raphael would say, "Our son will touch the world with his soul." At the time, it had seemed an impossible, almost naive dream. Now, before the incredulous eyes of the elite, that dream was beginning to take shape. Every tear she shed was also a silent cry of victory against all the years of humiliation. Gabriel, still immersed in music, didn't realize the intensity of the emotion he was causing in his mother. But Elena saw beyond that. She saw in her son not just talent, but the continuation of a legacy. The boy who had grown up amidst hardship, who had learned to be invisible so as not to get in the way, now stood in the center of a hall filled with powerful men, forcing them to listen to his truth. Elena felt her heart race, not with fear, but with pride. Pride in having supported her son alone, pride in never giving up, even when all seemed lost. And above all, pride in seeing Raphael alive in Gabriel's eyes and hands. In that moment, she knew, no matter the mockery, no matter the humiliation, that boy had been chosen to transform shame into greatness. Alexander tried to compose himself, but each new note from the harp was like a blow to his armor of arrogance. The mocking smile he had worn as a mask had completely disappeared, and now his expression revealed a man trapped by his own emotions. He, who had so often humiliated others to assert his superiority, was now forced to face his own pettiness before a 14-year-old boy. The magnate felt his face heat, and his previously cold eyes began to water against his will. He tried to lift his wineglass to disguise it, but his hands trembled so much that the crystal clinked, drawing even more attention. The audience could tell the all-powerful Alexander Whitmore was losing control. Each sound of the harp ripped a piece of the mask that held him together. The guests, previously complicit in the humiliations, watched in silence, fascinated. Many wondered if they were truly seeing the same man who had always dictated rules with a merciless gaze. It was like watching an empire crumble without the need for a single physical confrontation. The weight of music and truth was enough to tear down walls built for decades. Some executives exchanged discreet glances, as if this revealed weakness could be used against him in the future. Others, however, felt something deeper. The strange sensation that the greatness they venerated in Alexander was merely an illusion. Before Gabriel, everyone realized that the power of money was fragile when confronted with the purity of talent. The collective silence became, paradoxically, more deafening than any applause. Alexander clenched his fists on his knees, trying to regain his composure, but his heavy breathing betrayed his internal struggle. With each chord, forgotten memories returned, a childhood marked by poverty, the days when he dreamed of being heard, and the promise he'd made to himself to never again allow himself to falter. But here, surrounded by watchful eyes, there was no hiding. The harp transformed each memory into an open wound, and he couldn't control it. For the first time, the magnate realized he wasn't invincible, and the reverent silence of the room, which had previously exalted him, now seemed to judge him. Alexander felt the weight of defeat, not in business, but in something much deeper, in the pride that, before a boy, was finally shattered. His empire, built on arrogance, was crumbling before everyone, and nothing could stop it. When the melody reached a natural pause, Alexander took advantage of the silence to try to regain some of his lost authority. His body still trembled, but he stood slowly, adjusting his black velvet suit as if the gesture were enough to restore his image of power. The guests watched him with attentive gazes, awaiting his reaction, aware that this was a decisive moment. Alexander cleared his throat, forcing his voice to remain firm, and declared solemnly, "This talent is worth more than any check. Gabriel, what I saw and heard here today cannot be ignored. I want to invest in you, in your education, in your career. From this moment on, my empire is open to your future." His attempt was not just for recognition, but to reclaim his position as patron and master of other people's destinies before the audience. A murmur ran through the room, a mixture of surprise and disbelief. Some guests clapped timidly, interpreting the gesture as a graceful surrender, while others frowned, sensing Alexander's maneuver. For many, it wasn't genuine generosity, but a strategy to regain control of the narrative. "He can't stand losing," whispered a diplomat, analyzing the tycoon's every word. Elena, still teary-eyed, clasped her hands against her chest. Part of her was filled with pride at seeing her son recognized, but another part feared. What if this proposal was just another way to imprison him? After all, Alexander wasn't accustomed to offering anything without demanding something in return. The mood in the room oscillated between applause and suspicion, between reverence and distrust. Gabriel, standing before the harp, listened to the billionaire's words in silence. His face remained serene, but his eyes reflected something few noticed, the clarity of someone who knew his victory didn't need Alexander's approval. For him, the music had already said it all. The chords had pierced hearts and changed the course of that night, and no offer, no matter how tempting, could erase that. Still, the tension in the air grew. Everyone awaited his reaction, certain that the boy's answer would define the outcome of the evening. Alexander, behind his firm tone, hid fear. Fear that his proposal wouldn't be enough. Fear that control had slipped from his grasp, never to return. The silence that followed Alexander's proposal was broken not by Gabriel's response, but by the sound of spontaneous applause that began to echo among the guests. At first timid, coming from a few courageous ones, it soon grew into a deafening round of applause. It wasn't applause for the magnate, but for the boy. Gabriel, still before the harp, remained motionless, looking at the audience without arrogance, simply with serenity. He didn't need to speak. The music had already told its story. People rose from their seats, forming a collective bow that no amount of money could buy. For the first time that night, greatness lay not in jewels, crystal glasses, or luxury, but in a boy in worn sneakers. Some guests approached, viscerally touched by what they had witnessed. An elderly woman, known for her merciless sarcasm, wiped away tears as she said, "This boy brought something we have forgotten, the truth." A young heir, who had previously mocked, lowered his head in shame, unable to face the boy he had humiliated. Even the hired musicians gave a standing ovation, recognizing in Gabriel not just a talent, but a soul that communicated through music. Elena, at the back of the hall, no longer hid. She was crying openly, but this time they were tears of pride. She felt each drop wash away years of invisibility, transforming pain into triumph before all who had once ignored her. The atmosphere was one of consecration. Alexander, realizing he had completely lost his place in the spotlight, remained seated, motionless, as if the weight of defeat had glued him to his chair. His attempt to seize the moment had failed. The applause wasn't his. Gabriel's gaze, firm but without arrogance, made it clear he wasn't seeking wealth or titles. What he had achieved that night was far greater, the genuine respect and reverence of all present. Each clap echoed like a judgment against pride and like an invisible crown placed upon the boy's head. He, who had arrived as an invisible spectator, now left as a symbol of true greatness. The applause continued, but Alexander didn't stand. His gaze remained fixed on Gabriel, and with each passing second his expression grew heavier, as if bearing the weight of a lifetime of bad choices. When he finally managed to stand, there was no arrogance in his gestures, only an awkward silence that spread throughout the room. He took a deep breath, his lips trembling, and then said, in a voice lower than everyone was accustomed to hearing, "I said I would give you 300 million, but now I see that no amount can match the value of what you've given us here tonight." His words echoed like a confession, not just to the boy, but to the entire room. Gabriel, standing before the harp, didn't respond with words. He simply rested his hands on the instrument, as if ending the invisible dialogue he had held with everyone. His posture wasn't one of vanity, but of dignity. The boy who had arrived as a target of ridicule now left the hall as an undisputed victor, not because of his wealth, but because he had shown the elite what true greatness meant. Elena ran to him, embracing him in front of everyone, and in that simple gesture lay the greatest victory. Mother and son, previously invisible, were now respected as never before. The audience watched in silence, some moved, others reflective, all marked by a scene they would never forget. Alexander, defeated, took a few steps back, unable to hold his gaze. For the first time, he was no longer the one dictating the rules of the game. The hall no longer belonged to him, and greatness was no longer measured by the weight of his fortune, but by the purity of the music that echoed that night. As mother and son left arm in arm, still amidst applause, everyone understood they had witnessed something unique. And so, with the harp still vibrating in their hearts, the evening ended not with the billionaire's ostentation, but with the consecration of an invisible boy. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now, like, and share this video to help us bring you more extraordinary stories that positively impact lives. Thank you so much for your support.